Welcome back to Dark Untold. Tonight, we step into the shadowed heart of the Appalachians, where the trees grow so thick they choke out the light, and where something far older than the forest still waits. Some say the deep woods hide more than wildlife. Wandering children with hollow faces, cursed cabins that refuse to let you leave, and fog that carries screams which don't belong to the living. This is 8 new most disturbing true Appalachian Deep Woods horror stories. Tales of restless spirits, cursed ground, and unseen eyes that follow your every move beneath the canopy. Expect haunted groves, whispers that call your name in the dark, and shadows that vanish when you dare to shine your light. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and whatever you do, don't follow the voices calling from the trees. They told me never to follow the cairns. I'd read it in a forum, buried deep on some old hiking site. Someone warning newcomers about the trails around Seneca Rocks, West Virginia. If you see a pile of bones or stacked stones where no one should be hiking, turn back. She marks her ground that way. If you cross into it, you won't come back the same. I thought it was just Appalachian superstition, the kind of ghost story locals tell outsiders to spook them off their land. But that was before I went there myself, before I saw her, before I realized some folklore isn't just stories, it's warnings. My name is Kevin Marks. I'm 34 years old, an outdoor writer for a small East Coast travel magazine. Most of my work is safe, even corny 10 best fall hikes, hidden gems of the Blue Ridge, that kind of thing. But in the fall of 2019, I pitched a darker piece, something that leaned into mystery. Appalachian folklore was starting to trend online, and my editor loved the idea of the haunted trails of West Virginia. That's how I ended up camping alone near Seneca Rocks, with nothing but a tent, a pack, and a digital recorder. I wanted atmosphere. I wanted authenticity. What I got was a nightmare I still can't wake up from. The first day was normal enough. The climb was steep, the air crisp with the smell of pine needles and wet leaves. Ravens croaked somewhere above me, their black shapes crossing the pale sky like warnings I ignored. I recorded myself talking about the rock formation, about how Seneca Rocks has been a landmark for centuries, a sheer wall of gray stone rising from the Monongahela forest. The wind cut sharp at that altitude, carrying with it a smell of iron that I figured came from the rocks themselves. It was late afternoon when I saw the first sign. I'd veered off the marked trail, trying to get a raw angle for a photograph. That's when I saw a pile just off the ridge path. At first, I thought it was rocks, just another hiker's cairn. But when I knelt closer, my stomach turned. They weren't stones, they were bones. Small animal bones, bleached white, stacked deliberately into a pyramid. And carved into the bark of the tree, beside it was a symbol, a spiral, curling inward so tight it seemed to suck my eyes into its center. The air went still. No birdsong, no wind, just silence, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I told myself it was hunters, or maybe kids trying to scare tourists. I laughed, recorded a quick note about local superstition, and walked on. But I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing there, watching. That night, camped near a clearing, I couldn't sleep. The forest around me seemed too awake. Branches creaked, footsteps crunched in the leaves, though no one was there. At one point I swore I heard whispering, faint, female, carried on the wind. I stepped out of my tent, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Nothing, just the outline of Seneca Rocks looming above, jagged against the stars. But when I turned to go back inside, I froze. At the edge of the clearing, just where the trees thickened, stood another bone pile, larger than the one before. And on the trunk beside it, another spiral carved deep, the wood bleeding fresh sap as if the wound were new. I packed up camp at first light. I should have left the mountain. I know that now. But something in me, call it pride, call it stupidity, kept me going. I told myself I needed the story, that it was all just coincidence and nerves. By midday, the trail had all but vanished under a carpet of dead leaves. My compass spun uselessly, and every tree looked the same. That's when the feeling started, the unmistakable weight of being watched. The hairs on my arms lifted, and my gut nodded. I turned slowly, sweeping my flashlight across the trees even though it was daylight. That's when I saw her. She was half hidden behind a trunk, 30 feet away. A shape in black rags, long hair hanging in wet strands across her face. Her hands, God, her hands were too long, the fingers curling around the bark like claws. For one breathless second, I locked eyes with her. I couldn't see pupils, just a pale face and a mouth moving soundlessly as though whispering through the trees. I blinked, and she was gone. I ran. I don't even remember choosing a direction. I crashed through the underbrush until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out and I collapsed against a stump. My chest heaved, my ears roared with blood, and then clear as day, I heard her again. A whisper right behind me. Turn back. The voice was low, hoarse, like dry leaves scraping together. I whipped around. No one there. From then on, nothing was the same. Every tree seemed carved with spirals. Every step I took, I found another bone pile, larger and larger, until one was as tall as my chest. The woods twisted, paths leading me in circles, shadows darting just beyond my sight. And the misfortunes began. My recorder cracked when it slipped from my hand. My phone refused to power on, though the battery had been full. My ankle twisted badly on a root, and I limped for hours, sweat freezing against my skin in the mountain cold. Night came again before I could find a way down. And with night came her. The forest glowed faintly with moonlight, silver mist curling low to the ground. I huddled by a dying fire, trying to keep my eyes open. That's when the sounds began. Bones clattering, not far away, like someone was sorting them, stacking them. Then the cymbal spirals scratched into the dirt around my fire, fresh and wet, though I hadn't heard a thing. And then I smelled it. Smoke, not from my fire, but acrid, oily, filling the air like burning hair and herbs. My eyes watered. My chest tightened. She stepped into the circle of firelight. The rags hung loose, shredded, but her body beneath was wrong too tall, too thin. The joints bent sharp where they shouldn't bend. Her hair swung like moss, hiding most of her face, but when she looked at me, I saw the eyes, black pits, endless. Her mouth opened and a hiss poured out, 1,000 whispers at once. I scrambled back, my hands clawing at the dirt. She didn't move closer, but the ground between us began to shift. Bones pushed up through the soil, rising into a fresh cairn that seemed to grow before my eyes. My stomach heaved, bile burning my throat. Her hand lifted, one long finger pointing at me. "Marked," she whispered. The world tilted. I blacked out. When I woke, it was dawn. My fire was gone. My pack was gone. And carved into the tree I'd been leaning against was a spiral so deep it had nearly split the trunk in two. I don't remember how I got down the mountain. Just flashes branches tearing at my face, my ankles screaming with pain, the sound of whispers chasing me every step. When I stumbled into the ranger station hours later, they told me I looked half dead. They asked what happened. I told them I got lost, but I never told them the truth, because the truth is, I still hear her. At night, when I close my eyes, I hear the bones shifting, the whispers curling against my ear. And sometimes, when I walk past trees in the park near my apartment, I see spirals carved into the bark. Fresh, bleeding sap. I know what it means. I never left her woods. She followed me out. They told me not to go past the boarded shaft after dark. The men at the diner in town said it the way you tell a child not to touch a stove flat, certain, almost bored. But their eyes, those darting Appalachian eyes that never lingered on mine too long, told a different story. They weren't warning me because of loose timbers or collapsing ceilings. They were warning me because they believed something waited in there, in the dark. My name is Daniel Price. I'm a geology grad student from Virginia Tech, and I came to Buchanan County that fall to finish my research on abandoned coal seams. My thesis was on Appalachian mine collapses, how the mountains themselves groan and shift and bury the men who try to cut too deep. I thought I understood caves and rock. I thought everything could be measured with charts and seismographs. But nothing in my books prepared me for what I saw in that shaft. I'd rented a cabin just outside of Keene Mountain. It was one of those cold-leaning wooden places that smelled like pine sap and mildew, the kind of place you could almost hear breathing when the wind pressed against the walls. At night, coyotes screamed out in the tree line, and sometimes the sound was so close I'd wake up with my heart hammering. The townsfolk were polite enough, but distant. They were the kind of people who kept their stories locked up behind their teeth unless you bought them enough whiskey to loosen their tongues. That's how I first heard about the miners. Old Jack, a man with a voice like broken gravel, told me about it at the bar one night. He leaned in so close I could smell the sour beer on his breath. "You'll hear it first," he said, "the sound of a man coughing. Not no sick man, neither deep, rattling like the mountain itself is choking. Then you'll see the lamp, a little light bobbing down in the dark, like some fellas still working, still trapped in there. Don't you follow it? Don't you dare?" I laughed then. Nervously, yes, but I laughed. I'd been underground hundreds of times. I knew what methane smelled like, what damp rock felt like, the stale, suffocating air that never seemed to move. Ghost stories were just the region's way of dressing up tragedy, I thought. But when I drove back to my cabin that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what he said. 2 days later, I stood outside that very shaft. The boards nailed over the entrance were crooked, gray with rot. A weathered sign, barely legible, warned, "Keep out." My flashlight cut through the slits in the boards, showing nothing but black beyond. Black so thick it seemed to press back against the light. I told myself I'd only look inside, maybe take some measurements. Just enough to satisfy my curiosity. Breaking the boards was easier than it should have been. The wood cracked under the crowbar, loud in the empty forest. When I slipped through the gap, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Cold, damp earth, coal dust, and something else, something sour, like rust and old blood. The tunnel sloped down sharply. My boots crunched on loose stone and coal fragments. The beam of my flashlight caught jagged timbers, streaks of black where water had seeped down the walls. My breath fogged in the cold air, and I realized the deeper I went, the quieter the world became. No birds, no insects, just the sound of my own footsteps. After 10 minutes, I reached the first chamber. The roof above was scarred, a jagged wound in the rock where the cave-in had happened. I could almost picture it, the roar of stone, the screams of men, the way the mountain folded in on itself and sealed them in darkness. My chest tightened at the thought. That's when I heard it. A cough. It echoed faintly, as if from deeper in the shaft. It wasn't like any cough I'd ever heard. It rattled low, wet, and hollow, like lungs that had been filling with dust for 100 years. My blood went cold. I froze, straining to hear. Another cough, closer this time. Then the light. At first I thought it was a reflection from my flashlight, some trick of the beam bouncing off the wet walls. But no, this was different. A small, bobbing glow, the color of an old carbide lamp. It swayed gently, moving down the tunnel ahead of me. Every rational part of me screamed to turn back. But curiosity The same arrogance that had driven me into a condemned shaft pulled me forward. I followed. The deeper I went, the stranger things became. The air grew heavier, thicker, pressing down on me until it felt like my chest was wrapped in stone. My flashlight flickered, dimming and buzzing like its batteries were dying, though I'd replaced them that morning. I could smell something sharp now, metallic, like iron shavings mixed with rot. The coughing grew louder, and then I heard footsteps. Not mine. They shuffled ahead of me, slow and dragging, like boots scraping over gravel. The light bobbed faster, moving around a corner. My pulse thundered in my ears. When I turned the corner, I stopped dead. There were helmets, at least 6 of them, lying scattered on the ground, covered in dust. Their lamps were cracked, the metal rusted, but the light I'd been following didn't come from any of them. It floated in the air, impossibly steady now, burning with a sickly glow. And then God helped me. It turned toward me. I swear to you, I saw a face, just for a second. A man's face half buried in coal dust, eyes sunken and glowing faintly, mouth open in a ragged wheeze. His jaw worked like he was trying to speak, but all that came out was that hollow cough. I stumbled back, tripping over loose rock. My flashlight blinked out completely, plunging me into total darkness, except for that awful floating glow. It started moving closer. I ran. The tunnel seemed to twist in ways it hadn't before. My boots slipped on wet stone. My hands scraped against jagged walls. Behind me, the coughing grew louder, joined now by others. Dozens of them, men hacking, wheezing, choking. And underneath it all, a sound that froze my blood, the groan of shifting rock, like the mountain itself was waking up. I don't know how long I ran. The tunnel stretched forever, a labyrinth of black. Every time I thought I saw the exit, it vanished into shadow. My lungs burned, my chest felt like it was being crushed, and still, behind me, the lights multiplied. Little bobbing glows, an army of them, swaying closer and closer. At some point I fell. My knees slammed into stone, and my flashlight clattered out of my hands. In the dark, I felt a hand brush my shoulder. Cold, rough, not human. I screamed, crawled. Somehow, by sheer blind panic, I found the gap I'd broken through at the entrance. I burst into the night air, gasping like a drowning man. The woods outside were silent, watching. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. Even now, I can still hear them when it's quiet. That cough, that rattling death rattle, echoing in the corners of my mind. Sometimes I wake up in the night and see a faint glow outside my window, bobbing gently in the tree line. And I know they followed me out. They told me not to stop in the holler after sundown, not to wander off the marked paths, not to answer if I heard a woman crying in the trees. I thought it was just the usual mountain talk, the kind of folklore locals pass around to keep kids from getting lost in the woods. But I should have listened. God help me. I should have listened. My name is Daniel Cole. I'm 34, and for the last 7 years, I've worked as a surveyor for the state, mapping stretches of forest that most people never even hear about. My job is simple on paper. Hike out to remote areas, record elevation, terrain, and vegetation, and mark any old structures or hazards for state records. But what that really means is that I spend most of my life alone in places where people died cutting timber a century ago, or where families just disappeared without leaving more than a crumbled chimney behind. The Appalachians are beautiful, no doubt about that, but they are old. Old in ways that make you feel small. That day, I was working near Clay County, logging the ridges that dropped into a deep hollow. It was late autumn, the air sharp enough to sting when I breathed. The trees stripped nearly bare, so their black skeletons reached across the sky. My GPS was useless out there, constantly flickering, and my phone was just a dead weight in my pocket. I wasn't worried. I had my compass, a map, and enough hours in the woods to trust my own sense of direction. What I didn't have was a way to stop the unease crawling up the back of my neck when I realized how quiet the forest had grown. No birds, no insects, no squirrels rattling through the branches. Just me. The first time I heard it, I froze. A faint sobbing, so thin and distant, I thought it was the wind. But it wasn't the wind. It was a woman crying. The sound carried through the bare trees, threading into my ears and down into my chest until it sat heavy on my lungs. I swallowed hard and kept walking, telling myself it was just the way sound carries in a valley. But the further I went, the louder it grew. I remembered the old man at the diner that morning, hunched over his coffee like the weight of his years was too much for his shoulders. When I told him where I was headed, his hand trembled as he stirred his cup. "Don't be there when the dark comes," he said, his voice low and steady. "If you hear her, don't answer. Folks who do, they don't come back. She'll draw you off the path." I'd laughed, brushed it off. Now his words hit me like a stone dropped into water, rippling through everything I thought I knew. The sobbing followed me, shifting direction. Closer now, though I hadn't moved toward it. My boots felt heavier with each step. The air grew colder, carrying a wet, metallic smell, like river water soaked into rust. I gritted my teeth and muttered under my breath. It's nothing, just sound carrying. But my own voice felt like it didn't belong in that silence. Then I made my mistake. I stopped. The crying sharpened instantly, the sound of a woman choking on her own grief, and it was so close it felt like she was standing just behind me. My heart hammered, my throat burned dry. And before I could stop myself, I whispered, "Hello?" The sobbing stopped. The forest went dead still, so still I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Then came a new sound, the slow, dragging crunch of leaves, footsteps moving through the brush just beyond the line of trees. I spun, but there was nothing. Only shadows bending in the dying light. My skin prickled with a sensation I can only describe as being watched by something that did not blink. I forced my legs to move, stumbling down into the hollow, deeper than I meant to go. The trees closed in, their trunks damp and slick with moss. The ground squished under my boots, spongy, reeking of decay. That's when I saw her. She stood between two pines, half hidden in shadow. Her dress hung in tatters, gray and soaked, clinging to her thin frame like she'd just climbed from a river. Her hair dripped in long, tangled strands across her face. She didn't move, not even to breathe, but the crying came again, except it wasn't from her lips. It was from everywhere. Around me, above me, inside the trees themselves. I tried to speak, but my voice caught. She lifted her head, and I saw where her eyes should have been. Empty sockets. Black, endless holes that seemed to pull the air out of my lungs. She tilted her head, almost curious, then raised a hand and pointed deeper into the woods. That's when I heard it, the laughter of children. Soft at first, like it was carried on the wind, then louder, clearer, a chorus of giggles that set my teeth on edge. "No," I whispered. I don't know if I was telling her no, or myself. I turned and ran. Branches lashed my arms. Brambles tore at my clothes. I could barely breathe, every gasp tasting of damp earth and rot. And behind me, no, around me, the crying and the laughter wove together in a hideous symphony, always just out of sight. My compass was useless now, spinning wildly as if it too was caught in her grasp. Then I tripped. My boot caught on something solid, and I went sprawling. My hands landed on cold, wet soil, and when I pushed myself up, I realized what I'd stumbled over wasn't a rock. It was a skull. A human skull, half buried, its hollow sockets filled with dirt, jaw twisted open in a silent scream. I scrambled backward, bile rising in my throat. The ground shifted under me, soft and uneven, and in that moment I understood I was kneeling in a shallow graveyard. Bone fragments jutted from the soil like broken roots. My stomach lurched, and I ran again, blind to everything but escape. When I finally stumbled into a small clearing, my chest heaving, I saw it. A cabin. Old, sagging, its logs blackened with age. My maps hadn't shown any structures here, but I didn't care. Light flickered in the window. A lantern, shelter, safety. I crashed through the door without knocking. The smell hit me first mildew, rot, and something sour like wet wool left to decay. The lantern sat on a warped table, its flame guttering. In the corner, scattered on the dirt floor, were children's toys. A wooden doll, a chipped marble, a ragged teddy bear missing an eye. My heart twisted in confusion, in dread. Then the crying began again. Not outside, inside, right behind me. I spun, but the doorway was empty. The lantern sputtered, shadows stretching unnaturally long across the cabin walls. Wet handprints appeared on the boards, streaks dragging downward as if someone clawed their way out. The toys shifted. The marble rolled slowly across the floor until it stopped at my boot. And then her voice clear, sharp, breaking through the sobs like a knife through flesh whispered in my ear. "Help me find them." The lantern blew out. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember running. Only the feeling of the forest closing in, the shadows pressing tighter, her wails growing louder until they were inside my skull. I remember falling, my head striking something hard. And then nothing. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the gravel shoulder of a service road. The sky was pale with dawn. My truck was less than a mile away. My clothes were torn, my hands bloodied, but I was alive. I told myself it was a dream, a hallucination. Maybe I'd inhaled mold. Maybe I'd hit my head earlier than I remembered. That's what I told myself until I opened my pack. Inside, nestled between my notebooks and compass, was the wooden doll I'd seen in the cabin. Its carved face was worn smooth, damp to the touch, and it smelled faintly of river water. I quit not long after, packed my things, left the Appalachians behind. I moved back to the city, where the noise of traffic and people drowns out silence. But sometimes, late at night, when the city settles and the world goes still, I hear it again. Faint at first, like a memory, but then clearer. A woman weeping in the dark. And every time, I feel her presence pressing closer, waiting for me to answer. I was warned never to follow children in the Appalachian woods, but the first time I saw them, I thought it was nothing more than a trick of the mist, or maybe my tired mind playing games on me. They looked like lost kids barefoot, pale, standing just where the tree line thickened, their small hands curled at their sides as if waiting for me to notice. No sound, no crying, just the faintest tilt of their heads and the quietest beckoning motion with their fingers. My name is Nathan Ellis, 34 years old, born and raised in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm a wildlife surveyor by trade. I spend most of my time hiking, mapping out habitats, counting deer scat, measuring tree rings, and recording the endless rhythms of the forest. The woods are my office, and for most of my life, I've felt safer among the rustling of leaves than in crowded streets or fluorescent-lit buildings. But last fall, when I took a contract job deep in the Blue Ridge stretch of the Appalachians, I found myself questioning that old comfort. I learned what the locals mean when they say the woods don't just house life, they keep secrets too. It was late October, the kind of season when the wind carries a bite that smells of damp leaves and wood smoke, when twilight comes too early and lingers too long. I was staying in a rented cabin just off an old logging road, miles away from the nearest town. The old man who gave me the keys, Mr. Dalton, warned me in his creaky voice not to wander after dark. Not everything in these woods wants you finding it. he muttered, eyes fixed on the floorboards. I thought it was just the kind of superstitious talk people in small mountain towns pass around, stories told to scare off outsiders. I should have listened. The first night I heard them, it was nearly midnight. I just finished going through a day's worth of survey notes, and I was about to douse the lantern when I caught movement outside the window. The glass fogged faintly with my breath as I leaned closer. There, just past the porch, stood two children, a boy and a girl, no more than 8 or 9. They weren't dressed for the weather. The boy wore what looked like suspenders over a dirt-stained shirt, and the girl a faded dress that fluttered in the breeze. Both of them barefoot, toes pressed into the frost-tipped grass. They didn't knock. They didn't cry out. They just stood there. When I opened the door, the girl raised her hand and slowly curled her fingers in a beckoning gesture, urging me forward toward the tree line. The air outside felt colder than it should have. Damp, sharp, the kind of cold that seeped straight into your marrow. I remember thinking they must be lost, maybe some kids from a nearby property. But when I called out, "Hey, are you all right? Do you need help?" Their faces seemed to blur under the weak porch light. Not like movement, but like the features themselves were being smudged away. Eyes, mouths, noses, it all softened into pale hollowness. My gut screamed at me to get back inside, and I did. I shut the door, locked it, and leaned against the wood with my heart hammering. When I finally dared to glance through the window again, they were gone. I told myself it was exhaustion, maybe moonlight catching on the fog, maybe a waking dream. But the next day, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. My hikes felt different. Every snapping twig behind me made me whip around. Every whisper of wind between the pines sounded too much like breath. I found small footprints in the damp soil once, oddly spaced, like the steps of children. But they led nowhere, starting in the middle of the path and vanishing into undergrowth that showed no sign of disturbance. The second night, I made the mistake of staying outside too long. I'd been sitting on the porch with a thermos of coffee, sketching some notes by lantern light, when the fog began to roll in low, white and heavy, pressing itself against the tree line like a living thing. That's when I heard the giggling. It was faint, high-pitched, like children playing tag in the distance. And then I saw them again, 3 this time, all standing shoulder to shoulder just inside the fog, their heads tilted at the same angle, their arms hanging slack at their sides. I couldn't see their eyes, only dark pits where eyes should be, too large for their faces. They didn't move at first. Then one of them raised a pale, skeletal hand and beckoned. I don't know what compelled me, but my legs carried me off the porch. I stepped into the cold fog, every hair on my body bristling. The air smelled raw wet earth and something sour, metallic, like rusted iron. I followed them into the trees, and though I told myself I'd only go a few steps each time they turned, they were just far enough away that I thought I could catch up. Minutes bled into something longer. The woods twisted around me in ways I didn't recognize. Trees seemed to double back on themselves. I passed the same moss-covered boulder 3 times. My compass needle spun aimlessly, refusing to settle. And always, the children remained ahead, pale bodies glowing faintly against the mist, their faces nothing but hollow voids that seemed to widen as I got closer. At some point, the laughter changed. It warped into something deeper, wet and distorted, like a voice stretched too far. The air grew heavy, pressing against my chest. I realized my breath was ragged, the cold searing my lungs. My flashlight flickered, and in that stuttering beam, I saw more of them. Not 3, not 5, dozens. Children all around me, at every angle, stepping out from behind trees, from the fog itself. Bare feet whispering against the leaves. Blank faces turning toward me in unison. I panicked. I ran. Branches tore at my clothes. Roots caught my boots, but I kept running until my body gave out. Somehow, I collapsed against the steps of the cabin. I don't remember finding my way back. I don't remember any trail. I just remember falling hard onto the wood and gasping like I'd surfaced from drowning. For the rest of the night, I sat inside with every lamp burning, listening to the faint sound of children's hands brushing against the windows. They never knocked. They never tried to come inside. They only wanted me to come out. I left the next morning, my contract unfinished. I told Mr. Dalton I couldn't stay, couldn't work. He didn't look surprised. He only said, "You saw the children, didn't you?" His voice was heavy, resigned. He told me they'd been part of the mountain stories, long before he was born, lost souls of children who wandered too far into the woods, lured by something older, something that wears their innocence like a mask. "They don't want rescue," he whispered. "They want company." I drove out of those mountains with my hands shaking the whole way. But even now, weeks later, I can't stop thinking about them. I see their faces or the absence of them when I close my eyes. I hear their laughter in the wind, echoing faintly through my sleep. And worst of all, sometimes when I look out my apartment window at night, I swear I see small pale figures standing at the edge of the parking lot, waiting, beckoning. I don't know how far the woods reach, or if they ever really let you leave. They tell you not to follow the screams when the fog settles in the valleys. The old folks around Blue Ridge warn about it in low voices, like they're afraid the mist itself might overhear. If the fog starts screaming, my grandfather once said, you turn your back and walk away, even if it sounds like your own mama calling for help. I thought it was just another mountain tale, the kind told to spook children into behaving. But after what happened to me, I don't laugh at those warnings anymore. My name's Daniel, and I've been working as a night driver for a small delivery company out of Asheville. It's not glamorous, but it pays, and most nights I like the solitude, just me, the winding roads, and the sound of my tires humming through the mountains. That night in November, I had a route through Blue Ridge, delivering equipment to a ranger station tucked deep in the hills. The sky was low and heavy, the moon swallowed by clouds, and by the time I climbed past the last cluster of houses, a thick fog had rolled across the road like a living tide. At first, it was just ordinary mist, clinging to the trees and softening the headlights into halos. But as I pressed deeper into the mountains, it thickened into a choking wall of white, so dense I could barely see the hood of my truck. The temperature dropped with it, the kind of cold that crawls beneath your skin and settles in your bones. I slowed to a crawl, hands clamped on the wheel, trying to focus on the faint edge of asphalt. That's when I heard it. A scream. High, sharp, and ragged, cutting through the fog like a blade. My chest tightened instantly. It wasn't the sound of some distant coyote or bobcat. It was human, raw with terror. My foot hovered over the brake. The sound echoed again, closer this time, twisting into a sob and a shrill wail. I pulled to the shoulder, heart hammering, and killed the engine. The silence that followed was unbearable, pressing down on me harder than the fog. Then the scream came again, from deep in the trees to my right. Every instinct told me to stay in the cab, lock the doors, and keep driving. But what if it was a woman hurt, or some hiker who'd fallen? That thought burned through my fear, and before I realized it, I had grabbed my flashlight from the glove box and stepped out into the cold, wet night. The fog swallowed me whole. It wasn't like walking through air. It was like stepping into water, thick and suffocating. My flashlight beam cut only a few feet ahead before vanishing into swirling gray. The road disappeared behind me within seconds. The scream rose again, weaker now, like whoever was crying out was running out of strength. I pushed forward into the trees, branches dripping with mist, a forest muffled and strange. The air smelled faintly metallic, like damp iron, mixed with the sour tang of rotting leaves. My boots squelched in the wet earth as I moved, following the sound. It always seemed just ahead, never closer, like it was pulling me deeper. After what felt like 20 minutes, I realized I was circling. The grove of pines around me looked too familiar, the same crooked trunk leaning over a moss-covered stump. I slowed, swung the flashlight in a slow arc, and felt my stomach drop. I'd carved my initials into that very stump years ago on a summer hike. Somehow, I was back in the same spot. The scream tore through the fog again, but this time it didn't sound like pain. It twisted midway into laughter, harsh and broken, like someone mocking me. My skin crawled, and the fog thickened until I could barely see my own hands. The sound circled me, echoing from every direction, first a wail, then a shriek, then hysterical giggles that cut off as suddenly as they began. Panic clawed at me, and I tried retracing my steps, but the trees closed in tighter, shadows shifting in the fog. My flashlight flickered, dimming to a dull glow, though the batteries had been fresh. That's when I noticed movement. Shapes in the mist. At first, they looked like shadows, tall and thin, gliding between the trees. I told myself it was just the fog playing tricks. But then one stepped closer, close enough for me to make out the outline of a body. A man at least, it had once been. Its arms were too long, hanging nearly to its knees, and its head lolled to the side like a broken puppet. The scream erupted from its mouth, impossibly loud, reverberating through my chest like thunder. I stumbled back, hands clapped to my ears, and the sound changed again. Now it was my voice. "Help me," it shrieked in my exact tone. I bolted, crashing through the undergrowth, branches tearing at my clothes. The fog shifted with me, curling around every step, guiding me in circles. No matter how far I ran, I kept ending up in that same grove of pines, the stump with my initials waiting like an anchor. The shapes gathered closer each time. More of them now, their outlines clearer. Faces pale and slack, mouths gaping open wider than they should, each one unleashing a different scream. Some were deep and guttural, others shrill, others wild with laughter. Together, they created a chorus of madness that made my vision swim. I don't remember falling, but suddenly I was on my knees, the cold earth soaking through my jeans. My flashlight sputtered once and died, plunging me into pure darkness. The screams faded to whispers, hissing just at the edge of hearing, voices overlapping until I couldn't tell them apart. My chest heaved, lungs aching, and in the stillness between their whispers, I realized the fog wasn't just around me. It was inside me. Every breath dragged it deeper, burning my throat, filling me until I thought I'd choke on it. Somewhere in the mist, I heard a new sound. My own laughter. Hollow, broken, not coming from my mouth, but from the fog itself. The next thing I remember is waking up in my truck at dawn. The engine idled softly, my seatbelt buckled, the keys in the ignition like I'd never left. My clothes were damp, streaked with mud, and scratches raked my arms. When I checked my phone, I'd lost nearly 6 hours. I should have been at the ranger station long before sunrise, but instead, I was parked on the side of that same foggy road. I drove straight home and never reported the delivery. I figured I'd lose my job, but no one asked about it. No one mentioned the missing shipment. It was like it had never been ordered. Since that night, the fog follows me. I'll be out on the road and see a wisp curling along the asphalt, even on clear days. I'll hear faint laughter when I pass through low valleys. And sometimes, when I lie awake in bed, the mist creeps under my door, filling the room with that metallic stench. The worst part isn't the fog itself. It's the voice it carries. Because lately, when the laughter comes, it's not strangers I hear. It's my own screams echoing back at me, circling closer, waiting for me to answer. They told us never to follow the lantern light. If you saw it out here, swaying deep in the trees with no voice calling and no footsteps crunching leaves, you turned around and walked the other way. That was the rule every old-timer drilled into us kids who grew up in Clay County. But I didn't listen. And now, no matter how much I tried to convince myself it was just the woods playing tricks, I still wake up in the dark with scratches burning across my skin and the smell of kerosene heavy in my nose. My name's Josh, and I've lived in these mountains all my life. I work construction when there's work to be had, and odd jobs when there isn't. Nights and weekends. I hunt, fish, or camp, just like most folks around here. We know these woods better than we know the streets of town, but they've still got corners that feel older than people, older than time itself. The cabin was one of those places. It was October, the kind of crisp night when the air stings your lungs and the wind rattles the branches like dry bones. My cousin Kyle had driven up from Charleston, eager to go camping the real way. As he put it, no campgrounds, no RV hookups, just a tent, firewood, and the wide black sky. We packed light, hiked into the timberline, and set up along a ridge where the trees thinned out enough to see the stars. By dusk, we had a fire snapping and a couple of trout cooking in foil. Everything felt right. But after midnight, when the flames had burned down to glowing coals and Kyle had passed out snoring in his sleeping bag, I saw it. A faint glow through the trees. Not a fire too steady, not a flashlight too yellow. A lantern swinging slowly back and forth as if someone carried it through the dark. At first, I thought it was a hunter or another camper, but the silence told me otherwise. No boots crunching leaves, no voice calling, no dog barking. Just the faint creak of metal and the soft, pulsing glow. Every nerve in me told me to wake Kyle and stay put. But I felt pulled, like a thread inside me had been caught and reeled toward the trees. I left the camp behind, boots crunching frost, breath puffing in white clouds, moving deeper and deeper into the woods. The lantern led me down a hollow I didn't recognize, past trees warped and bent like they'd been twisted by some old hand. The air smelled wrong, damp and metallic, like rusted nails soaked in creek water. My skin prickled as the light grew brighter, and then I saw it. The cabin. It stood in a small clearing, a squat log structure half swallowed by moss and vines, its roof sagging, windows black. No smoke from the chimney, no sign of life. But in the one window, set on a crooked sill, a lantern burned with a sickly yellow light. I don't know what made me step forward. Curiosity, stupidity, maybe something worse. The closer I got, the more wrong it looked. The logs didn't look cut by hand or saw. They looked grown that way, warped into unnatural angles. The door sagged, but had no rust on its hinges. I thought I heard whispering inside, but when I stopped, the night was silent except for the wind. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. Mold, kerosene, and something sharp, like copper pennies pressed against my tongue. My flashlight beam danced across a single-room dusty floorboards. A stone hearth choked with ash, a table with one chair, and the lantern flickering atop it. The walls leaned inward, like the whole place was breathing around me. I should have run, but my legs carried me over the threshold. The door creaked shut behind me with a click I didn't remember hearing. I lifted the lantern, and the shadows in the room stretched long and sharp, bending away from me as though they were alive. And then the whispers returned. Not from outside this time, from the walls. They slithered through the cracks in the wood, layered voices, men, women, even children, all murmuring over one another. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was pleading, begging. My skin crawled, and I dropped the lantern back onto the table, heart hammering. That's when I saw the scratches. The table, the chair, even the walls were etched with claw marks, deep, desperate gouges that had stripped the wood raw. Some looked fresh, the splinters sharp. And when I shined my light across the floor, I saw them there, 2 scratches that began at the door and dragged toward the bed in the corner. The bed itself was nothing but a frame with rotting straw, but lying on it was a quilt. At least, I thought it was a quilt. When I stepped closer, I realized it wasn't fabric at all, but dozens of strips of leather stitched together. The smell hit me again. Iron, sweat, something rotten, and bile rose in my throat. That's when the lantern went out. Darkness slammed into me so hard I gasped. My flashlight flickered and died with it, plunging me into a black so heavy it felt physical, pressing against my chest. The whispers rose, louder, urgent now. My skin burned, sharp stings racing down my arms, my neck, my chest, like invisible claws dragging across me. I thrashed in the dark, stumbling toward the door, but it wasn't where I thought it should be. The room stretched, warped, every direction wrong. Then something touched me. A hand, cold and thin, fingers too long, curling against the back of my neck. I screamed, spun, swung my fist into empty air. The whispers stopped. The silence was worse. And then I woke up. I was lying face down in wet grass, miles from where we'd camped. My pack and gear gone, my clothes torn. Dawn was just breaking, a pale gray light spilling over the ridgeline. My skin burned. When I pulled up my sleeve, long red scratches raked down my arm, scabbing over as though they'd been carved hours before. My chest, my legs, even my back were covered in them, dozens of lines and strange patterns. I stumbled back to camp, half in shock, only to find Kyle still asleep by the dead fire, none the wiser. My pack sat by his tent, untouched, as though I'd never left. He swore I hadn't moved all night. He laughed when I showed him the scratches, said maybe I'd walked into a bramble in my sleep. But when I told him about the cabin, his face changed. He wouldn't look at me. He just muttered, "You weren't supposed to go there," and refused to say anything more. I've tried to find that hollow again, tried to track the same ridge and creek beds, but the cabin never shows itself twice. Some nights, though, when the wind dies and the woods fall still, I see a faint yellow glow through the trees, swaying back and forth. I don't follow anymore. But I don't sleep easy either, because every time I close my eyes, I hear those whispers again, pressing against the inside of my skull, begging, pleading, until they shape into words I can finally understand. They don't say help. They say, stay. They told me never to touch the staircases. That was the first rule whispered around the fire at Ranger Camp, the one spoken half in jest, but with just enough of a pause to let you know it wasn't really a joke. If you see stairs in the forest, walk the other way, an older ranger said on my first day. Doesn't matter if they're stone, wood, or steel. Doesn't matter how old they look. You don't climb them. The guys laughed when he said it, but nobody met my eyes. And I should have listened. My name's Daniel, and for the last 8 years, I've worked search and rescue in the Appalachian wilderness. I've seen just about everything you can imagine lost hikers. Broken bones, animal maulings, people freezing to death after underestimating how fast the weather can turn up here. But none of it prepared me for the night I found the staircase. None of it prepared me for what followed after I ignored that one rule. It was late autumn, just before the first snow. The kind of cold that bites through your jacket the second the sun drops behind the ridgeline. I'd been called out on a missing person case, a solo hiker mid-30s named Aaron Peters. He'd been due back 2 days before, but never showed. His wife said he'd been fascinated with old logging trails, the forgotten ones that twist into parts of the forest most people avoid. That's where we figured he went, so I hiked in with a pack, a radio, and a flashlight heavy enough to double as a weapon if I needed it. The woods felt wrong almost immediately. You get to know a kind of rhythm when you work starbirds, wind, the chatter of squirrels, even the way branches sway overhead. That night it was too still. The forest was hushed like it was holding its breath. My boots crunched on frost-bitten leaves, and the sound felt unnaturally loud. Once or twice I thought I heard something behind me, but when I stopped, nothing. Just the hollow silence of trees pressing in on all sides. Around midnight, I spotted it. A clearing opened up where no clearing should have been, and in the center of it, rising straight out of the dirt, was a staircase. I froze, my breath clouding in the beam of my flashlight. It was wooden, about 12 steps, old but not rotting, like it had been built last week and abandoned immediately after. There was no railing, no platform, nothing around it but dead grass and frost. It just climbed upward and stopped at nothing. My stomach turned, and I swear I felt every hair on my arms lift under my jacket. The stories hit me all at once. Rangers whispering about staircases in the woods, about how people who went near them didn't come back, right? About climbers who vanished, and others who returned speaking in flat, broken voices, like someone else was using their mouth to talk. I told myself it was just a structure, some leftover relic from logging days, or maybe hunters. But the clearing was too clean. No stumps, no ruins, no signs of any cabin or watchtower it might have belonged to. Just the staircase. And here's the part that keeps me up at night. My radio crackled then, spitting static into the quiet. I pulled it off my belt, thinking it was command checking in. Instead, through the static, I heard a voice, not one I recognized. "Help me." 2 words, faint, strangled, like someone choking on water. I nearly dropped the damn thing. "Aaron? This is Ranger Daniel copy, if you can hear me." Nothing. Just static. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to mark the location and report it. But then I thought of Aaron's wife, how her voice broke when she begged me to find him. I told myself maybe he'd built the stairs as some marker. Maybe he was close. I wanted to believe it, so I stepped into the clearing. The air shifted immediately. Colder, sharper, like stepping into a freezer. My light flickered, and I could feel my pulse beating in my temples. The closer I got, the harder it was to breathe, like the air itself thickened around me. The stairs looked ordinary wooden planks, slightly damp with frost, but my brain kept insisting they weren't supposed to be there. They bent the rules of the forest somehow, like a splinter of reality shoved where it didn't belong. And then I saw footprints. They led right up to the first step, muddy, half-frozen, the size of a man's boot. Aaron's, I was sure of it. They stopped at the bottom, no prints walking away. I leaned down, touched the lowest stair. My fingertips burned with cold that wasn't natural, like touching metal in deep winter. My breath came fast, and before I could second-guess myself, I climbed. The first step groaned under my weight, but not like normal wood. The sound stretched, warped, like hearing it underwater. My vision tunneled, the trees around me blurring into shadows. Another step, then another. By the fourth, the world below me felt miles away, though I couldn't have been more than 3 feet off the ground. I swear I could hear whispers then, just on the edge of my hearing, voices overlapping, some pleading, some laughing, some reciting things I didn't want to understand. At the 7th step, the radio on my belt flared again. Daniel, not Aaron's voice, not any voice I'd ever known. It was flat, hollow, spoken in my own cadence, like I was listening to a recording of myself slowed down. My knees buckled, and I gripped the stair, heart hammering. The woods shifted around me. The clearing melted into a darker place, trees bending at impossible angles, their branches clawing at the sky. A smell hit me, then iron and rot, like old blood soaked into earth. I blinked, and the stairs stretched upward, higher now, disappearing into the canopy. Something moved above me. A shape tall, thin, wrong. It leaned over the top of the staircase, its face blurred like it didn't belong to a face at all, just shifting features that never settled. And its voice poured into my skull, not through my ears, but straight into my head. Keep climbing. My legs trembled, and for a second, I almost obeyed. Almost. But then I saw the footprints again, burnt into the wood now, black and charred, leading up and vanishing where the stair disappeared into shadow. Aaron had climbed. He hadn't come back. And if I went further, neither would I. I forced myself down, step by shaking step, every whisper clawing at me to stop, to stay, to look up. By the time my boots hit the frozen ground, I was gasping like I'd run a marathon. The clearing was silent again, the staircase standing plain and still as though nothing had happened. But it wasn't the same. I ran, crashing through underbrush, branches clawing at my jacket. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead, lungs burning, heart racing. When I reported the search the next morning, I didn't mention the staircase. I said I'd found no sign of Aaron, which was true in the official sense. The rangers nodded, but one of the older guys looked at me too long, like he already knew. That was 3 months ago. I haven't slept through a night since. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, I hear the creak of wood behind me, like a footstep on a stair. Sometimes my radio, long switched off, sputters to life with a hiss of static, and a voice that sounds like mine whispers from the dark. Keep climbing. And here's the worst part: I dream of the clearing. I dream of standing at the bottom step, Aaron's footprints beside mine. Only now, there are more. Pairs of footprints that look exactly like my boots, burned into the wood, leading up into the shadows. I know it's waiting. And one night, I'm afraid I'll climb again. They told me if you see the red eyes in the dark, don't look back. Don't stop your car. Don't breathe too loud. And whatever you do, don't follow. The stories sound ridiculous until you're the one driving those back roads in West Virginia. The trees clawing at your headlights. The night so black, it feels like the stars themselves abandoned it. I used to think Mothman was just a legend, something people in Point Pleasant leaned on to explain away tragedies. But now I know better. I've seen him, and I can't get rid of the feeling that he wasn't just watching me. He was waiting. My name is Daniel Wyatt. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a freelance journalist, mostly covering strange history and unsolved mysteries. It doesn't pay much, but I'd grown addicted to chasing stories that lived in the gray space between folklore and fact. In November of 2021, I drove down to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, to work on a piece about the original Mothman sightings. 50 years ago, in the 1960s, couples reported a winged creature stalking them near the old TNT area. And weeks later, the Silver Bridge collapsed, killing dozens. I wanted to walk the same ground, talk to locals, and see what truth, if any, might still linger there. I rented a cheap cabin off a lonely road just outside town. The kind of place with wood-paneled walls, a single flickering bulb on the porch, and a heater that clanged like it had tuberculosis. The owner, an old man named George, handed me the keys and muttered as he turned away, "Don't go looking for him. He finds you when he wants." I laughed nervously, but he didn't laugh back. The first few days I spent talking to locals. A retired cop told me about pulling kids over near the TNT domes, their faces white as snow, insisting they'd seen a bird as big as a man swoop over their car. A hunter said he'd given up going near the river after something with glowing red eyes stared at him from the tree line, and he couldn't move for almost 10 minutes, frozen like a rabbit under a hawk. None of them smiled when they spoke. None of them seemed like they were exaggerating. It was the fourth night when it happened to me. The sky was moonless, clouds swallowing every shred of light. I'd been driving back from an interview at a roadside bar, the type of place with taxidermy deer on the walls and beer signs buzzing like insects. My tape recorder sat on the passenger seat, filled with hours of shaky-voiced testimony. I remember glancing at the gas gauge, half a tank, and then noticing how the radio had gone to static, even though I hadn't touched it. That's when I saw them. 2 red lights hovering just above the tree line. At first, I thought they were distant taillights, but they didn't move. They just hung there, burning bright like coals. My stomach knotted, every hair on my arm standing up. Instinct told me not to stop, not even to slow down. But my hands gripped the wheel tighter, and my foot eased up on the gas without me meaning to. The eyes lifted, higher and higher, until they cleared the tops of the trees. Then the shape emerged massive, with wings that seemed to blot out the stars that weren't even there. A black outline against black sky, its edges shifting like smoke, but solid enough to cast a shadow across the road. My headlights caught a flash of something leathery, something that wasn't feathers, but wasn't quite skin either. I couldn't breathe. My chest locked as if invisible hands were pressing down. A cold spread through me, not like winter air, but like standing too close to an open grave. I realized with horror that I'd slowed almost to a crawl, the car creeping along as if pulled by something outside my control. Then it swooped. The creature dropped from the sky in a single, silent motion, landing on the road 20 yards ahead of me. Its body was towering, hunched, the wings folded like a shroud around it. And those eyes, God, those eyes burned into mine, a red so deep it felt alive. My hands shook on the wheel. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, but the car refused to move. My muscles were locked, frozen in that dreadful gaze. And then came the sound. Not a roar, not a screech, but something worse. A low hum, like a swarm of bees vibrating inside my skull, rising higher until it was a piercing shriek that only I seemed to hear. My vision blurred. My nose bled onto my shirt. The car lights flickered, the engine stuttered, and for a heartbeat I thought everything me, the car, the world, was about to collapse in on itself. Then it was gone. One blink, and the road ahead was empty. The air was still. The hum faded, leaving behind a silence so thick I could hear my own pulse hammering in my ears. My limbs loosened, and I slammed my foot on the gas, tearing down that road faster than I've ever driven in my life. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the cabin's single chair with the recorder in my lap, trying to explain what I'd seen into the microphone. But my voice kept breaking, stuttering, sounding like a man twice my age. Every time I replayed it, I swore I heard faint static under my words, like wings beating in the distance. The next morning, I woke to pounding on my door. It was George, the owner. His face was gray, eyes wide. "The river bridge," he rasped, "collapsed last night. Tractor trailer went in. Couple cars, too. Just like before." He looked at me hard. "You saw him, didn't you?" I couldn't answer. I didn't need to. It's been almost 2 years since that night, but the memory hasn't dulled. If anything, it's sharper. I'll be walking through a parking lot, and the hairs on my arms will lift. I'll be driving under an overpass, and I'll catch myself scanning for red lights in the sky. I avoid mirrors at night, because just once, I thought I saw those eyes staring back at me in my reflection, glowing like fresh blood. People think Mothman is just a monster story. They're wrong. He's not a creature you hunt or kill. He's not even a warning you can escape. He's an omen made flesh, a shadow that walks before catastrophe. And once you've seen him, you start to wonder what disaster is waiting for you. Because if Mothman watched me that night, if his eyes burned into mine and left me paralyzed, then maybe it wasn't just about the bridge collapse. Maybe it was about something still coming, something he wanted me to know I couldn't avoid. And every night, when I close my eyes, I still see him there at the edge of the trees, waiting, watching, silent,